Hi, Chris here. So this is Chuwi's new Aerobook Pro. It is a crowdfunded Indiegogo laptop, has a 4K screen, a full-size backlit keyboard, and a good weight, a good build quality too. Now this was sent out to me from Chuwi to review in exchange for this video that you're seeing right here. I'm not being paid for this review. They are not influencing this review either. All the opinions expressed are 100% my own, of course. Like all of my videos, otherwise I wouldn't even be doing this because what would be the point? So it has a 6th gen chip in here. No, that is not an error, a 6th gen chip. So it's a bit old. It's the 6287U. It has Iris Pro 550 graphics, so something that's a little bit more capable with some dedicated RAM to drive the 4K display. So in this in-depth review, I will be covering the build quality, of course, the keyboard, the touchpad, even the webcam. I'll give you a sample of that, including 2 samples of these loudspeakers. I'll go in depth, we'll take a look at the performance and anything else I can think of. So it comes in the typical brown box from Chuwi, and our power supply, this one is 19 volts, 3.42 amps, so 65 watts, and it will take around 2.5 to 3 hours to fully charge the laptop's 55 watt hour battery. Looking at the underside, so this is also made out of metal right here, everything's screwed in place. Screw in the middle there too, which is great to stop any keyboard bounce. And then we have left and right downwards firing speakers with a little small cutouts on the top of it. So they're both upwards and downwards firing, but I would say a good 80% downwards, these speakers. Here's the fan, and it does vent the hot air out the back. So this is the intake all along right here. And then we do have that M.2 2280 SSD slot. Now this one is completely empty, so one's already filled, that's a 256GB SATA 3 SSD, and then you can install another one up to 2 terabytes right here. Now there is some good news with upgrades. We can at least install an NVMe SSD for faster speeds, and it will work, but you've got to use the drive that is accessible to us, which is good. That means we don't have to open up the whole laptop. It's just 2 screws to gain access to this hatch. So our internals here, they do look good. There's a bit of free space here to play with. So they could have almost put in another SSD, or they could have added maybe upgradable RAM, which would have been great. So this is our battery pack here. So 55 watt hours screwed into place here. It has an internal plastic frame that everything is screwed in place to. Speaker design is different. So these are much larger in size, and they do produce a tiny bit of bass, which most of the Chinese laptops I review have terrible speakers. These ones are actually probably the better ones I have heard. Now we do have 2 copper transfer heat pipes taking the heat away from the motherboard, and this chipset right here. RAM that is unfortunately soldered onto the motherboard, so no RAM upgrades. If you need 16GB, then you need to pay for that upgrade and buy the 16GB version if you're interested in getting this laptop, that is. And then of course, our fan here, reasonably large, decent kind of size. Overall, the internal layout does look pretty good. It's just disappointing we have no wireless card upgrades or RAM upgrades, which would have been great to have. The Aerobook Pro here has a metal build to it. It's quite a good quality one. It has a matte finish. I like the grey color they've gone with. It's a slim laptop as well, so it is only about 16 millimeters of thickness. That's not including the rear rubber feet. It weighs 1.66 kilos. And here on the left, you can see we've got DC in for charging, status LED, USB 3 port, HDMI 1.4, and then a full spec Type-C port. Now this one is USB 3 spec, so that means it supports also power delivery, which I will plug in now. So it will take about 3.5 hours to charge, and we do get out of this port 4K 60 frames per second. Then on the right hand side, we have a 3.5mm headphone jack that does support microphones. The output out of this one is clean. There is no static or hiss over it, which is good. USB 3 port, and then a micro SD card reader. So the cards will sit in flush, which is good. However, it's only USB 2 spec. So reads and writes top out about 22, 23 megabytes per second. Now the only branding you will find on this is right here. So on the top of the lid, just a small Chuwi logo. It's rather discreet. There's no glowing white backlight Chuwi logo like previous laptops they had. And yes, you can actually open it up one-handed. You'll see it'll lift up a little bit, and the hinge does feel stiff, which is good. Now this palm rest, it's also made out of metal. So this is the furthest that the screen hinge will allow us to put that screen back. I think it reclines enough, so if you're going to be using it on, say, a sofa or something like that, it should be okay there, but it won't lie completely flat like other laptops. This laptop comes with a very large touchpad. It supports Windows 10 gestures, and I don't really have too much of an issue with it. I've just noticed that sometimes with the finer movements, it can be a little bit fiddly. So if your finger is there, sometimes the cursor will jump around and move a little tiny bit. Now it does have hardware left and right click in buttons here. They don't have a loud sound to them. They are rather quiet. So typing on this keyboard is very good. I like the spacing of the keys they've got here. We've got very nice key travel, good feedback from these keys as well. So about 1.5 millimeters of travel. So it's not too shallow, it's not too deep either. And as I mentioned before, the backlighting, which is currently on here, where my bright light, you can't see it too much, is evenly distributed. I'm not seeing any light coming out from one underneath the keycaps, which is good. However, this model, I do have a bit of a problem with the space key. If I press it right on the edge here, or on this edge, it doesn't tend to register all the time. It will work maybe about 7 out of 10 times, or even 6, which is very poor. In the middle, it's always working. Now, Chuwi is aware of this. Apparently, it's just an issue with this model because it is an engineering sample. The final version will have this issue corrected, they've told me. So you can see our shortcuts at the top here. So the screen brightness controls and volume, you need to hit function first, then to control that. We've got print screen, page up and down, separate arrow keys as well, and then the full numerical number keypad. And speaking of the BIOS, well, good news is here it is completely unlocked to us. So that means our CPU configuration, power limits, everything, okay? So there are some settings in there that you should definitely not mess with, could get yourself into trouble. And then you have yourself a rather expensive paperweight. So when you first power it on, we do have these options right here for language packs that are pre-installed. So we've got English, German, Spanish, French, Italian, Chinese, Russian, and Korean, I believe. So you could be seeing some shimmering with the screen, and that is just on camera that is happening. So we've got a NeTAC SSD now. This is just a SATA 3 drive. I have benchmarked the included drive, 256 gigabytes. And yeah, not exactly fast. I mean, I wish they'd gone with a PCIe SSD with this one. Would have been good. And you can see we've got 206 gigabytes free there. And in the device manager, the wireless card is the all too common Intel Wireless AC3165. Now you get maximum transfer speeds of around 380 megabits per second out of this one, so it's not super quick. And then popping over into Windows right here, just wanted to point out that we do have Windows 10 Home. It is version 1909. And also the RAM, so 8 gigabytes installed. It is dual channel, this RAM. So we have a 15.6-inch BOE panel in this is the hardware. Now the maximum brightness is 340 nits, which is quite good. It is, however, a glossy panel. And I find the lowest brightness setting to be simply too bright. I mean, look at this. That is the lowest brightness right there. And then on 100%, we get that 340 nits. Because it is a glossy panel, it is super reflective, and that is probably one of the most frustrating things. There's a way around it, of course, by using an anti-glare screen protector. So the Adobe RGB value here is 74%. This is measured with my Spider Pro 5, so that is not a bad result. Then we get 69% NTSC and 95% sRGB. So it is a quality panel in here. Now I have a tiny little bit of light leakage. It is very hard for me to capture on camera. It's just a little tiny bit at the top here. And really, it will not bother me at all unless I'm looking at a complete black image. Then I see just that little bit shining through. But this is going to vary from panel to panel. So expect to have a little bit, maybe up the top, maybe a little bit down the bottom, or one of the sides. But it's actually not bad. So this screen I feel is great for looking at video content. For media consumption, it is absolutely perfect, apart from being, of course, just a glossy panel there. So when you're looking at video for one of your favorite YouTube channels, if you put it into 4K, it does look really quite nice on this screen. Now the bezels around this screen, they are matte, which is good. And up the top here, we do have a tiny little webcam with 2 microphones left and right of it. So here's a sample of our webcam. You can see it's a little bit choppy. It doesn't seem to be running at 30 frames per second. It's just HD as well, and the audio you're listening to is from those dual array microphones, so very average to poor webcam quality. So we have a 6th gen CPU. This is a Skylake, okay? Skylake U is the Core i5-6287U, and this one does have the Intel Iris graphics, the 550. So it's only 2 cores, 4 threads, and the maximum turbo speed is quite actually low now for, well, 2020, isn't it? We're seeing a lot of laptops getting up to 4.8, 4.5, at least over 4 gigahertz, so that is 3.5, which will affect the performance. So it does have a TDP maximum of 28 watts. It's a lot higher than the 15 watt CPUs that we typically see. and it is 14 nanometers. It's not like it's the old 28 nanometers, but I mean, Intel's still on 14 nanometers, but the plus improved. Yeah, you get the idea there. So performance, general performance here, I just want to quickly show you that when you're in YouTube and things scrolling, this is very, very smooth. Now I'm recording this part here in 60 frames per second, so you can see that it is very smooth. So the whole video is actually in 60, but this part is running in a proper 60. So over into Twitter 2, Twitter performance scrolling. So light tasks like this CPU, even though it's only 2 cores, and the 28 watts, and the Iris graphics is going to handle this kind of stuff really quite well. If I move over into just editing documents, the same for spreadsheets, you can see when I scroll up here, there's, I decided it's going to save. Okay, that's normal, automatic saving. A little bit of slowdown because I've got 83 pages here, so a lot. So when I just select some text here and just do a test, okay, that's fine. All right, that's not going to be a problem for this kind of chipset. It's really easy kind of light work for it. What about demanding video files here? So let's bring up a 4K clip. This is an older one. Shot on a Samsung Galaxy Note 4, I think it was. And yeah, looks actually really good in 4K on the screen, being a 4K clip. Very nice panel that is in this. And what about, okay, this is something that's very demanding. So this is ATVC file, 10-bit. Let's check out the performance of this one. Okay, wow. Bit of lag there at the start. You give it a few seconds and then it does become smooth here with that native decoding. This is actually very similar performance I see with the Gemini Lake chipsets that I used to review in the channel, but now pretty much sick of them. And okay, what about something even more demanding here? So this is 4K, 60 frames per second. All right, you can see this one's, yep, that's pushing the limit. It is a super demanding file. That is not running at 60 frames per second. That is running like at 15 frames per second. Simply too much. That is a very high bit rate, that one too as well. So that's to be expected, just pushing the limit. And we get on to benchmarks. So Cinebench R15, you get a score of 320 CB. Yeah, that is very low for 2020. So this is not, I feel, a laptop for editing 4K video files. Definitely not. It just seems a little bit too choppy, too laggy, painful for that kind of thing there. And what about the Cinebench 20? Also ran that. We got a score of 735 CB. Again, low. Yeah, okay. To be expected right there. Just wanted to point out too that the Type-C port, that it can run 60 Hertz 4K, which is good. Just make sure you have the correct cable there. So I used a Type-C to HDMI 2 cable, and that was just one, this generic one I bought off Amazon. Works perfectly fine. And what about, okay, the HDMI port? As I pointed out at the start, if you missed it, it's only HDMI 1.4 spec. So yeah, 30 Hertz is our limit there. So let's go back into Chrome for a second. You can see all of this multitasking here is very smooth and fast. There is our Geekbench 5 score. If you're interested, again, yep, average score, very low. And same goes for Geekbench 4 there. So nothing impressive because, well, it's an old chip. But this is a lot faster than the Core M3. We had the 6Y30 in the first Aerobook model, a lot slower than this. A little bit of a GPU test here. So this is OpenCL score of 28,000. Again, kind of average, but not too bad for integrated because it does have a bit of dedicated RAM with the Iris Pro graphics. So all up, I think the performance for office tasks, for media consumption, things like that is very good. And you can run a lot of tabs in Chrome. But occasionally with the 4K screen, you sometimes see minimizing, maximizing, a little bit of lag that does pop up there as well. So we'll have a look now at gaming performance. So we'll run a FPS meter there so we can see what kind of performance we get. And it's just the typical light game here. So I will run Counter-Strike. All right, so here we go. So this one is actually running much better than the typical integrated. You can see around 40 frames per second. This is 1080p. It does look pretty good. Now the screen is quite good at upscaling, I have noticed. It won't probably last long. So lighter titles like League of Legends, Dota 2, and this of course Counter-Strike, they're going to be playable on this, but keep it to 1080p and low settings. I'm just going to run and charge in here. About to die. Maybe not. Oh, now I'm dead.
So let's take a look at the thermals. I have been monitoring it with Intel's Extreme Tuning utility here. So it does get up to around 81 degrees maximum. You can see 81. But the fan comes on to save it from getting any hotter. So it will not trigger any thermal throttling. You occasionally do get some power limit throttling, just spiking now and then for a split second. But overall, it is pretty good here. So I'll just bring up HW info as well. That's been running for now, 6 hours of runtime. And 81 degrees, 81, hasn't gone over 81 here, so the thermals are quite good. Well, what about battery life too as well? So you can get around, I would say, somewhere between 5 and maybe even 6 hours. This is on the lowest brightness setting, and this was just in Chrome. A lot of YouTube. I was in my website and I was doing a few other things, typing in Google Drive. So, not amazing battery life here. Now, it does report that it's just a 37 watt hour battery, but I believe it still is actually a 55 watt one, because with this 28 watt CPU, if it was just 37 watt hours, it would have gone through it, I think, a lot faster than the reported times that I'm able to get out of this. So I have been trying to run Linux Mint on here. This is just the only distro that I have at the moment that I can test out, and for some reason it just will not boot. It keeps saying remove the media, so every time I try to boot through a USB pen drive, it says that, and I don't get anywhere. I tried compatibility mode, which you're currently looking at some of the stuff on the screen there, and that is just not working either. So sadly, it might actually work, but at the moment I don't have a lot of time to test it. But I would say Linux compatibility at the moment, not good. As I showed you with the internals, we have those two downwards firing speakers. They do transmit a little bit of sound out through the top of them as well, but it's mostly just reflected downwards off the tables and whatever surfaces you're using. But they actually do sound good. So well done, Chuwi, finally putting some decent sounding loudspeakers with a little bit of mids and bass in their laptop. And here's a sample. Okay, so what about fan noise? Now, when you're doing light tasks, so just browser, for example, internet surfing, you're not going to hear that fan just occasionally come on and off. It should turn itself off. But as soon as you start to do anything demanding, then the RPMs of the fan kick in and you will hear it quite often. So here's a sample of the fan noise.
Alright guys, so I want to recap here as fast as I can. So the build quality is good. I like the hinge. It is lightweight. It's only 1.6 kilos. Very thin actually. So look, if I close the lid and hold it up to the camera like that, you can see. It's not bad. It does attract fingerprints, the matte paint job on here that it has. And that screen, it's a 4K glossy panel, but I actually do like it. I think it's good. It's a high quality screen. Very reflective, of course. The lowest brightness setting, though, is way too bright. So hopefully a BIOS update will come through from Chuwi if they're watching this video, which they should be. Please, BIOS update to just lower the lowest brightness setting to something a little bit more dimmer than what it currently is. It's just way too bright. So the 340 or so nits we're getting out of it is good. Webcam quality, nothing special. I mean, the mics are okay, but the webcam, yeah, it's quite poor there. So the keyboard. This is a nice keyboard to type on. I do like it, good spacing, full-size keyboard. However, as I pointed out, I'm having issues with the space bar. I didn't want to hide that fact. I'm not hiding anything here. And this is the way that Chuwi can improve on things. Now, I did ask them about this keyboard, and they said I have an earlier version of the keyboard, so it will be improved upon on the final version. There won't be that issue that I'm having, that just the edges don't register all the time. About 7 out of 10 times when you press it, it will register. But right in the middle, it's working fine. The rest of the keys are good. Even backlit keyboard too as well, and yeah, it's not bad. Now this touchpad, the touchpad is big, it's large, it's good. We've got the hardware left and right mouse buttons, but I find the very fiddly finer movements, for example, if you're doing a cut and paste of an image or using the selector tool or the lasso or whatever, it can be very frustrating with this touchpad, so this is recommended, a mouse. I would use a touchpad for normal kind of use, but it's, if anything, fine and fiddly. I don't think the sensitivity is quite there with it. It does have support for Windows gestures as well there with it. Gaming, yeah, this is not for gaming. That gets me to the big con, really, I think, of this particular laptop, is the 6th Gen CPU. I mean, that's going to put off a lot of people. I mean, come on. We're in 2020. I think at least put the Core i5-8250U in this. Would have been a perfect chipset for it. We can edit then 4K video smoothly. This one's not so great for 4K video editing. I wouldn't use it at all. But Even if we have to pay 50 US dollars more, I think a lot of people would say, hey, you know what, that's a good idea. 50 US more, give us a much better 8th gen chip with the 4 cores and then the 8 threads. It would really boost up that performance and just make it so much more attractive then to people, while still giving us the nice screen, the build quality, backlit keyboard, and an attractive price there. So there you go. That is more or less the full story behind the Aerobook Pro here from Chuwi. So hopefully now you know whether or not it's a laptop for you. And if you did like this review, please do give a thumbs up. I put quite a bit of work into this, testing out behind the scenes and everything that you don't see, of course. And do subscribe to the channel if you are new. Thank you so much for watching.